Hello, I'm Jessica Keeney. This is Keeney's Crafty Corner, and I am going to show you how to make this masculine card. We use stamps and dies from the Geared Up Garage set with Stampin' Up. This is the outside of the card. This is the inside of the card. So not a pop-up like some of the ones I've done, but still a cool card, and it shouldn't take you 3 hours to put together. Okay, not all the pop-ups take 3 hours, but they take considerably longer. Oh yes, I need to tell you that the write-up for this project is on my website. Link will be in the description below. The materials list is on my website, and there are affiliate links on the material list. If you buy things from the links on my list, then I will earn income from your purchase. So thank you, and be sure to make me your Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. This is my first copy of the card that we're going to make. This is my prototype. What we're going to make is going to look very similar. I used cheap papers that I already had in my stash for this one. For the one we're going to make, we're going to use some of the papers from the Stampin' Up! Naturals collection. We're going to use Mary Merlot, which is this red color, Soft Suede, which is this brown color, Sahara Sand, which is this cream or tan color. And then this basic black isn't in the collection, but it's a great color, and it's also a Stampin' Up! Color. We're going to use the Geared Up Garage stamps, and then for the dies, we're going to use the Garage Gears and the Stitched Rectangle. This is the second largest. We're going to use the 4 7/8 by 3.5 inch. And I'm going to use an embossing folder that's not part of the Stampin' Up! Collection, but there are plenty of Stampin' Up! Embossing folders that will work just fine. And I've got a link to the one I suggest on my web page, but the one I'm going to use looks like diamond plate. I think it's pretty cool. So I did some preliminary work to make the assembly go faster and the fun part go faster. So what I did was I cut out and scored the body of the card and folded it over. And then I cut out the other colored pieces that we're going to need. Now you'll recognize that all of these are the size of a quarter sheet of paper. And this body of the card is the size of a half sheet of paper. So let's begin the assembly part, the fun part, the stamping, the die cutting, the assembling. The first thing we're going to cut out as part of the actual assembly process is going to be this part right here. So we take the Mary Merlot and we place it on our sandwich. You can look up the way to make a perfect sandwich. And we've got the stitched rectangle die face down so that the stitching and the die cutting will actually go into the paper. And I'm using some removable tape to hold the die and the paper together. So we've got our sandwich. We're going to run this through the die cutting machine. I will not be showing that on camera. I like to run this through my die cutter twice to make sure I get a good cut. Now we can take the tape off, and you'll notice here we've got the inside piece, which is going to be here on our card. We've got this outside piece, and the cool thing about this die is it's stitched on the inside and the outside. So this piece here gets to be set aside, put that in our stash. We might need that later for something. Now this, we're not going to need it later for this project, but this piece, this is going to go in an embossing folder. So I want the stitching to be on the right side, the top side, and I want the diamond plate to be raised. So I'm going to place this so that my diamond plate is going to be raised on my pattern or on my paper. I'm going to add an extra layer there for my sandwich. Again, you can look that up. I'm going to run this through my machine and away I go. The glare on this is a little rough. This just came out of my machine. I'm going to pop it out of the die cutting folder. See, we've got that nice, or sorry, the embossing folder. We've got that nice raised pattern. And you're going to notice that it's a little bit different than the one in the sample card, because this one I actually had a cream color paper and I went over it with a sponge brayer and cherry cobbler ink. But I wanted to do this one a little bit different. So we've got this part cut out. That's for the outside. Now we got to cut out this part for the inside. And so that's going to be with the stitched rectangular die again and the Sahara sand paper. So we're going to cut that out with the die cutter. I have the Sahara sand piece of paper laying on top of my die cutting base. I'm going to take a little bit of removable tape. I prefer the removable tape over, say, blue masking tape, because I find the blue masking tape pulls up paper after it goes through the cutter. I am not measuring where I place this. I'm just eyeballing it. So if we're going to err, we want to err with slightly more space on the bottom than the top. That's a rule I learned in photography about mounting photographs and matting them. And then we're going to make our sandwich, run this through the machine. This just came out of the machine. You see when we take the sandwich apart that the frame on top likes to just pop off. We're going to carefully remove that tape. Hey, look, now we've got another frame. These are going to make great windows in another project. So we're going to set those aside. Set our stitched rectangular die aside. Sorry, my computer is connecting and disconnecting to USB drives, and I don't know why. Anyway, so we're going to set these two aside, and then we're going to stamp and cut the other pieces for the front of the card and the inside of the card. We have the stamps we're going to use mounted on our clear blocks. We've got your classic, we've got the ink spot, we've got the Mustang. The little gears are a die that we use, so we're not going to do those until later. First thing we're going to do is we're going to stamp our sentiment. That's going to go on the soft suede, and it's in black, and we're going to try to put it right about here. Now on this one I tore around the edge. I like that effect. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. So I want to try to leave enough room that I can tear around the edge. Now this is a black stamp pad from a paper pumpkin kit that I got. Instead of pressing the stamp onto the pad, I'm going to tap the pad onto the stamp. That helps make it so that I don't get ink along the outside of the stamp. So I'm going to stamp, 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 stamp. And then I'm going to press it firmly here onto that paper. I'm going to set that stamp aside, and I'm going to set this aside. I'll clean that stamp later. Now I'm going to take out my Blackberry Bliss. I'm going to set aside the black stamp, and for the Blackberry Bliss, we're going to ink up this ink spot. Now we need 2 ink spots, so we're going to tap, 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 tap Blackberry Bliss on this stamp. Up, I've got some ink there where I don't want it. I like to keep a rag and water around so that if I get ink anywhere I don't want it, I can take it off. Okay. So again, we're going to tap, 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 and you'll notice that it doesn't really get on this stamp evenly. That's okay. It's an ink spot. It's not even. So we're going to stamp that once. Lift up. That came out pretty well. That's a good looking ink spot if you, or oil spot if you ask me. Stamp it again. Remember, we want to leave enough room around it that we can use the die cutter. Going to close up because the die cutter or the die has to go over that spot and cut out that little stamp section. Going to pull out the classic Mustang. That gets stamped on this Sahara sandpaper as well. I'm gonna tap, tap, tap that black, can even rub it over. And then we're gonna press just one. Again, we wanna leave enough room that our dies can cut around these, but we also don't wanna waste paper. Oil spots, so those I had to fussy cut, and we need to cut out 2 sets of the gears, and then we need to cut out the Mustang around the part that we stamped, and then we also need to cut out a black Mustang. I'm going to just put a little bit of that removable tape here, keep the dies where I want them while I'm positioning them and sending them through the die cutting machine. I will first cut all of my pieces with the dies, and then I will fussy cut and tear. And of course, we could fussy cut this if we wanted, but I really like that torn effect. Just came out of the die cutter. I want to mention something I've seen occasionally when I run stamped pieces through the die cutter is I sometimes get some ink on my plates. So you want to be aware of that, and you want to be sure that you're cleaning your plates off if you're sending inked pieces through your die cutter. I like to set aside the little holes and whatnot that come out of the die cutter, because those will make a good shaker card at some point, and sometimes they don't all come out. Usually we can just hit them, or we can poke them out with our picking tool. I will fuss with that tape later. Gonna set aside that gear. We need to cut another gear, because remember we need 2 sets of gears. I'm gonna send this through the die cutter. This part always feels kind of magic to me. So we'll get all of our tape off later. We don't have to do that on camera. We set aside our pieces of scratch paper. Now I'm busy fumbling with stuff. We're going to fussy cut around these oil spots. And basically that's just cutting a rough outline around the part that we stamped, much like we get when we use the die, except for not as precise. We're going to do this for both of the oil spots. We have our oil spots cut out, setting aside that scratch paper. Now we're just going to tear out this sentiment. We want to be careful, obviously, that we don't actually tear into the sentiment. And we're tearing much like we did the fussy cut, just making an outline around the sentiment. And this is a lot less precise than even the fussy cut was. We have our pieces cut out, so now we're going to assemble the card. I do a lot of eyeballing when I do this. I like to use double-sided tape for the back of the big pieces. I'm just using the cheap double-sided tape that you can get at Walmart, but I have a link to Stampin' Up. Obviously, if you buy anything from the links that I provide, then I earn an income off of it. So you need to be aware of that. I have tape on both sides of this, and I'm just going to stick it down here onto the card. We're going to apply double-sided tape to the back side of this piece, and this is the piece that goes inside the card where you can write your greeting or your message. Remember, stick it on the back side. We don't have to get tape all the way to the edges, but if we go over the edges with the tape, then we do need to trim it because it would make our card stick together if we didn't, and we don't want that. Okay, so if we decide that we don't really like the placement of a piece, we can try to lift it up. I didn't actually press real hard on that one, so I was able to lift it. I felt like there was too much space on one side. going to open up the card and we're going to place this in there. And I like to try to get it even. I'm eyeballing. Remember, if you're going to err, have a little bit too much on the bottom and not the top. There we go. We're going to stick together the Mustang. We're going to do this with these glue dots. I'm going to take the picker tool, and the way I have it is the black and the Sahara sand, so the top and the bottom piece of the Mustang are slightly skewed. That way the Mustang doesn't blend into the card and it looks like it's got a little bit of a shadow. So I put glue dots on. It'd be a little awkward if the dots on the black one aren't covered up, because then we would end up seeing it potentially. Got my glue dots on. I'm going to line up the card the way I want it. I'm happy. I'm going to press it down. Over. We're going to put some foam dots on. Foam dimensionals. We're just going to use 2. We can pick these up with the picker tool, or we can use our hands. We are less likely to remove stick from the dots if we use the picker tool. By using the foam dimensionals, we add a little bit of extra dimension to our card. Now I'm going to put the gears on. I'm just going to lay these where I want them roughly. On this card, I did not use a foam dimensional, but I'm going to use a foam dimensional on this card because I want these gears to pop up just a little bit more than they do now, because we need to make sure that we can't see the white once we put the gears down, the white of the foam. I am going to put some adhesive on these little gears. We're still going to have some dimension this way, but I'll get better stick. Okay, and if you can see some of that white, we can go ahead and you can trim it. I'm going to use the foam dimensional for the oil as well. We could have used double-sided tape on this oil slick if we didn't want it to lay flat. We're going to use foam dimensional dots on the back of the sentiment also. So we're going to decide, do we want it down a little? Do we want it up a little? Do we want it being the sentiment more or less in the middle? I'm going to go with more or less in the middle. If we don't really like how we positioned it, we can try to get it back up with our picker tool. But if we do that too many times, it's not going to stick again. Now we're going to add the pieces to the inside of the card. To the inside, we're going to use glue dots because we want these pieces to lay flat. We don't want to add extra bulk inside our card. We're putting the glue dots on the back side of the gears because we want to see the front side when we open the card. Place those there. Now we're going to put some glue dots on the back of the oil slick. We probably could have stamped that oil directly onto that piece, but I chose not to. We also could have cut some black to go around that oil to add a little bit of a shadow. Going to place that oil slick right there. There you go. We have a cool card. This could be a Father's Day card. This could be a birthday card. This could be a just thinking of you card. This is definitely a masculine card. If you want, you can put your little handmade stamp on the back. If you're using Stampin' Up products, there's a copyright Stampin' Up stamp that you can put on the back as well.